Flora, Ulysses. Bye. Very good. Girls and boys, yesterday we started setting the scene. It's when you get it ready in your mind to visualize the movie of the story. I wrote these notes on a sticky note and I stuck them in the book. And it says, the setting is a hot summer afternoon. The characters are Flora, Mom, and Donald, whoever that is. And the problem is the vacuum. Mom is vacuuming. She had a death of a squirrel. I guess she's vacuuming outside. And Flora has a contract. It's a contract that she is supposed to read literary rich books. Chapter 4, a surprisingly helpful cynic. And we decided, I don't think we decided exactly what a cynic is, but we're deciding what a cynic is. What happened to the board? It's very sad what that board looks like right now.
We can start the video over again?
Nope. I'm just going to take my sweatshirt off because it's a little hot. Today is brought to you by Team Sports, college team sports. Today's team sport are the Raiders, but not the Windsor Locks Raiders, the Middle Tennessee Raiders. Miss, this is Middle Tennessee. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on YouTube. Okay. Anyhow, I didn't mean to do that, but I was like a little warm in my LSU sweatshirt. Flora ran from her room. She ran down the stairs, and as she ran, she thought, for a cynic, I'm surprisingly helpful. She went out the back door. Her mother called to her, and she said, where are you going, Flora Belle? Flora didn't answer her. She never answered her mother when she called her Flora Belle. Sometimes she didn't answer her mother when she called her Flora either. That's a freshy kid. Flora ran through the tall grass and cleared the fence between her yard and the Tickmans in a single bound. Move out of the way, Flora said. She gave Mrs. Tickman a shove and grabbed hold of the vacuum cleaner. Is Mrs. Tickman Flora's mother? Neighbor? It was heavy. She picked it up and shook it. Nothing happened. She shook harder. The squirrel dropped out of the vacuum cleaner and landed with a plop on the grass. He didn't look that great. He was missing a lot of fur. Vacuumed off, Flora assumed. His eyelids fluttered. His chest rose and fell again. And then it stopped moving altogether. Oh, girls and boys, I don't know if I could read this to you. Flora knelt. She put a finger on the squirrel's chest. This is terrible Thursday afternoon. At the back of each issue of the Illuminated Adventures of the Amazing Incandesto, there was a series of bonus comics. One of Flora's very famous bonus comics was entitled, Terrible Things Can Happen to You. As a cynic, Flora found it wise to prepare. Who knew what horrible, unpredictable things could happen next? Terrible things can happen to you, detailed what action to take if you inadvertently consume plastic fruit. This has happened more than once. You would be surprised. Some plastic fruit was extremely realistic looking. How to perform the Heimlich maneuver on your elderly Aunt Edith if she choked on a stringy piece of steak at an all-you-can-eat buffet. What to do if you are wearing a striped shirt and a swarm of locusts descends. Run, locust eat stripes. And of course, how to administer everyone's favorite life-saving technique. CPR. Terrible things can happen to you did not, however, detail exactly how someone was supposed to give CPR to a squirrel.
Oh, sit the squirrel. Good.
I'll figure it out, said Flora. What will you figure out, said Mrs. Tickman. Flora didn't answer her. Instead, she bent down and put her mouth on the squirrel's mouth. What will you figure out? It tasted funny. If she were forced to describe it, she would say that it tasted exactly like squirrel. Fuzzy, damp, slightly nutty. Have you lost your mind? Said Mrs. Tickman. Flora ignored her. She breathed into the squirrel's mouth. She pushed down on its small chest, and she started to count. Chapter 5. The squirrel obliges. Obliges, that means like agrees. Something strange had happened to the squirrel's brain. Things had gone blank, black, and then onto the black blankness there came a light so beautiful, so bright, that the squirrel had to turn away. A voice spoke to him. "What's that?" said the squirrel. The light shone brighter. The voice spoke again. "Okay, you bet," said the squirrel. He wasn't sure what exactly he was agreeing to, but it didn't matter. He was just so happy. He was floating in a great lake of light, and the voice was singing to him. Oh, it was wonderful. It was the best thing ever. What happened to the squirrel? Raise your hand. Lights, feeling floating, feeling good. What happened to the squirrel, Ferris?
The squirrel woke up.
The squirrel woke up. Where did the squirrel wake up, or what was happening when the squirrel happened to wake up? What was happening? Your knee does not need your mask. Thank you very much. What was happening to the squirrel? There's a light. It feels beautiful, like a floating lake.
Oh, I know.
What?
The squirrel turns into a superhero.
The squirrel turned into something.
I watched the movie.
So, let's continue. There was a loud noise. The squirrel heard another voice. The voice was counting. The light receded. Receded means it turned back. So, it was getting light and feeling nice. The squirrel had... But then, Flora had saved it with the CPR. "Breathe!" the new voice shouted, and the squirrel obliged. He took a deep breath, shuddering breath, and then another. And the squirrel returned to life. Chapter 6. In the event of a seizure.
Ready?
Well, yeah, one whole page. "Well, he's breathing," said Mrs. Tickman. "Yes," said Flora, "he is." She felt a swell of pride. Show me your prideful selves, people. When you are prideful, you put your shoulders back and your chin up and your chest is out. You are proud. That's right. I know 2 + 3 is 5. Or that's right, I saved a squirrel's life. The squirrel rolled onto his stomach. He raised his head and his eyes were glazed. "For heaven's sake," said Mrs. Tickman, "look at him." She chuckled quietly. She shook her head, and then she laughed out loud. She kept laughing, and she laughed, 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 and she laughed so hard that she started to shake. Was she having some kind of a fit? Flora tried to remember the terrible things could happen to you advised in the event of a seizure. It had something to do with the moving of the tongue out of the way or stabilizing it with a stick or something. A seizure is when there's a little missnapple in your brain and you do things that you can't stop. Only for like 30 seconds though.
Okay, good.
Flora had saved the squirrel's life but didn't see any reason she could save Mrs. Tickman's tongue. The sun sang a little lower in the sky. Mrs. Tickman continued to laugh hysterically. And Flora Bell Buckman started looking around the Tickman's backyard for a stick. So It's Flora Bell Buckman and it's Mrs. Tickman. So there's the Tickmans and the Buckmans. So in the Tickmans' kitchen, Mr. Tickman gives Mrs. Tickman a vacuum cleaner. But Flora, so I was confused in the beginning. Flora is a Buckman, and so she heard the vacuuming out in the yard, and it was Mrs. Tickman. Flora Buckman heard the vacuum from Mrs. Tickman in the backyard when she sucked up a squirrel, and then she saved her life. Chapter 7, the soul of a squirrel. What is a soul? S-O-U-L, soul. Not the thing at the bottom of your shoe, not the sole of your sneaker. What is a soul? Yes?
It's like, it's like a thing. It's like, it's something that keeps you alive. It's your life.
It's your life. Okay, what else, Henry?
There's a movie called Soul, and they change souls.
And that just sounds odd.
Like this.
That just sounds scary to
There's a
me.
cat.
What else, Ferris?
Soul is like the soul of your body, your heart, your brain, your whole body.
All right, so it's part of you, right? But you can't see it.
Yeah. It's like Harry Potter. There's a movie Harry Potter. He saw it.
All right, now you're getting me scared.
It's fake.
The squirrel was a little unsteady on his feet. His brain felt larger, roomier, and as if there were several doors in the dark room of itself, doors he hadn't even known existed, while he was suddenly being flung. So remember, they only think of one thing. Basically, I'm hungry. When am I going to eat? Where can I get my food? Like, it's all about their brains. They're always thinking about their stomach. And now he's feeling smarter. Everything was shot through with meaning, purpose, and light. However, the squirrel was still just a squirrel, right? How do you do it? And he was very hungry. Very,
Yeah, I see my.
very
Oh no,
hungry.
not this again. He ate.
It looks like he goes to the bottom underneath part of the vacuum to get things out. That was the whole chapter 7.
What?
Not even. Not even a page. Helpful information. Okay, so maybe I'll stop here. Helpful information. Not here. The next chapter. Helpful information. Flora and Mrs. Tickman noticed at the same time. The squirrel, said Flora. The vacuum cleaner, said Mrs. Tickman. Together they stared at the Ulysses 2000X and at the squirrel, who was holding it over his head with one paw. That can't be. The squirrel looked at the vacuum cleaner. That can't be. You already said that, said Flora. I'm repeating myself? You're repeating yourself. Maybe I have a brain tumor, said Mrs. Tickman. It certainly was possible that Mrs. Tickman had a brain tumor. Flora knew from reading the terrible things can happen to you that a surprised number of people were walking around with tumors. Girls. Fix your bodies, please. It was sitting there, keeping you company, waiting, and you just had absolutely no idea. This was the kind of helpful information you could get from the comics if you paid attention. The other kind of information that you absorbed from the regular reading of the comics, most particularly from the regular reading of the illuminated adventures of the amazing Incandesto, was the impossible things happen all the time. For instance, superheroes and heroes were born of ridiculous and unlikely circumstances, spider bites, chemical spills, planetary dislocation, and in the case of Alfred T. Slipper, from accidental submersion in an industrial-sized vat of cleaning solution called Incandesto, the cleaning professional's hardworking friend. I don't think you have a brain tumor, said Flora. There might be another explanation. Uh-huh, said Mrs. Tickman. What's the other explanation? Have you ever heard of incandesto? What? Said Mrs. Tickman. Who? Said Flora. Incandesto is a who. He is a superhero. Right. And your point is? Said Mrs. Tickman. Flora raised her right hand. The point, and she pointed with her single finger at the squirrel. Surely you're not implying, said Mrs. Tickman. The squirrel lowered the vacuum cleaner to the ground. He held himself very still. He considered both of them. His whiskers twitched and trembled, and there were cracker crumbs on his head. He was a squirrel. Could he be a superhero?
Yeah.
Alfred T. Slipper was a janitor. Most of the time people looked right past him. Sometimes, often in fact, they treated him with disdain. They had no idea of the astonishing acts of heroism and blinding light contained within his outward humdrum disguise. Only Alfred's parakeet, Dolores, knew who he was and what he could do. I wonder if Mr. Nolan is a superhero. Does he do super heroic acts?
Yeah, he
Changes paper towels? But really, what does he really do when he's not here at North Street School? Tootie! Shouted Mr. Tuckman from the back door. Tootie, I'm hungry. Tootie? That was a ridiculous name. Flora couldn't resist the urge to say it out loud. Tootie, she said. Tootie Tickman? Listen, Tootie, go inside, feed your husband, say nothing to him or anyone else about this. Right, said Tootie, say nothing. Feed my husband. Okay, right. She began walking slowly towards the house. Something had happened to her. She is now acting strange, right, Messiah? What are some of the strange things she is doing? Raise your hand if you can say some of the strange things that she is doing. Kennedy?
She sounds serious.
Yeah, she's walking slowly. She was laughing and laughing and laughing, and now she can't stop laughing. She's being different, right? Like, strangely different. Mr. Tickman called out, are you done vacuuming? What about the Ulysses? Are you going to just leave it sitting there? Ulysses, whispered Flora. She felt a shiver run from the back of her head to the base of her spine. She might be born a cynic, but she knew the right word when she heard it. Ulysses, she said again. She bent down and held out her hand to the squirrel. Come here, Ulysses. Flora, Ulysses, I am so confused.